Thank you very much. And since morning, I've been enlightened with so many good views and analysis of the situation. I will take you to something which is, I don't call it academia, but it is purely on principles metaphysics. And since it is Iqbal's seminar, I thought that I bring some ideas about Iqbal, because he gave his views on Palestine. He died in 1938. So he understands the cultural problems of the Hindus, the Muslims, and he gave us a vision about Pakistan. So I thought that I say a few words, and within the stipulated period of time, 25 to 30 minutes, I will complete. Thank you very much. The title of this paper is Iqbal's Metaphysics of Culture and the Arab Awakening. The Arab Awakening is a unique happening which is giving us a moment of reflection to revisit our values and philosophies. The Arab Spring is being studied from different perspectives, and we have very good perspectives in the morning and in the afternoon session. Our perspective is essentially rooted in Eastern metaphysics. It also enlightens us in understanding the polarization between Eastern and Western values and philosophies. It is essential to understand the dimensions of this polarization in order to comprehend the reality of cultural diversity and integration in the contemporary context of Arab transformation. Man has been blessed with knowledge in order to remain journeying on the path of righteousness without going astray. He has been endowed with freedom so that he could create goodness in the cosmos by virtue of his thought, feeling, word and deed. But he has not succeeded at times to live up to the higher possibilities of his cosmic existence. It has led to imbalance both in the individual and society. The struggle of truth against falsehood, justice against injustice, and freedom against bondage has not come to an end in the history of man. It continues to take different cultural forms in different ages and countries. Man in the scenario of cultural history has tried to understand himself, the cosmos, and God at different levels and with different orientations. His journey continues with series of affirmations and negations. One of his foremost concerns has been to grapple with the problem of knowledge. Epistemology has generally guided him to ontology, that is the science of being. Is there any possibility of a world beyond our ordinary empirical world? Are there possibilities of knowledge within man beyond his sense experience? These are essentially two interrelated primordial questions, at times nameless, which to all intents and purposes have been found in their varied formulations in different cultures of the world. They shall continue to remain so till the end of times, these two primordial questions. The Eastern metaphysical, religious and philosophical traditions have given affirmative answers to these questions, while the philosophies of the modern West, including materialism, dialectical materialism, positivism, logical positivism, atheistic existentialism, and certain forms of linguistic philosophy, have denied the transcendent world and any transcendent source of knowledge. This question of affirmation and denial of knowledge, I think, is very important, because it is now going to help us in interpreting the social phenomena. Kant, a German philosopher, raised a very important question in the history of human thought in his critique of pure reason. And the question he raised was, and will continue to be raised till the end of times, is metaphysics possible? He denied the possibility of metaphysics. He considered only sense experience and pure reason as valid forms of knowledge. According to him, there was no way to reach the reality beyond appearance. He banished God, freedom, and immortality from the realm of knowledge. His critique of practical reason accepted them merely as postulates without any connectivity with knowledge. His question had posed a great challenge to the metaphysical or the traditional world. Many thinkers in different cultures accepted this challenge, including Iqbal, who belongs to our part of the world, born in 1877 and died in 1938. Who is one of the most dynamic thinkers in the world of Islam. He was well versed both with Eastern and Western thought. He combined in himself both traditional knowledge and modern learning. He was deeply steeped in the Eastern tradition and had a thorough understanding of Greek thought, Western philosophy, and sciences. He carefully studied the German philosopher Kant and keenly perceived the subtle trends of modern philosophy in the West. He turned Kant's philosophical question, is metaphysics possible, into a religious one. And the question was, is a religion possible? Iqbal answered in the affirmative and thereby developed his own religious metaphysics. And Iqbal's whole system of philosophy he has developed while differing from Kant. So unless we understand the German philosopher Kant, it is not possible to understand Iqbal's philosophical system. His traditional understanding, coupled with deeper study of modern philosophy and modern psychology, made him critically examine Kant's assumption. He found no cogent reason in Kant's reservations about knowing the ultimate reality. Iqbal did not accept sense experience as the only source of knowledge. He considered heart perception as a higher form of knowledge which complemented sense perception. And this divide between sense perception and heart perception divides the East and the West, and will continue to divide, because there are many other things which are beyond our paper, but this is a very important thing to understand. The problem of knowledge has its direct and indirect bearings on the understanding of culture and its various expressions. The term culture is impregnated with different meanings, and there is no universal definition of it, which could be acceptable to all. Now we use the word culture, but once we try to understand, okay, what's the definition of culture, there is no universal definition. It poses a fundamental problem, but at the same time it is commended for keeping it an open issue. So this is also one of the things, that if it cannot give a definition of culture, at least it keeps the term culture as an open issue. And when it keeps it as a living issue, as an open issue, then it broadens the concept of culture. Thinkers belonging to diverse cultures are approaching the issues from different perspectives and thus are enriching the subject field. The contemporary bent of mind is manifesting a tendency of treating the concept of culture in a more holistic, comprehensive and wider sense. It is realizing the need to have a broader definition of culture, including social, ideational and artistic aspects reflecting the whole life of a given society. I have written, I would just like to say a few words about the Chinese concept of culture, and they have added the concept of cultural revolution, which embraces the whole of their lives, based on dialectical materialism, dialectics applied to nature, and historical materialism, the method of dialectics applied to the development of history. And they have given a wider meaning, a political meaning, social meaning, cultural meaning to the term cultural revolution. But unfortunately, and I think most of their thinkers are now in the process of thinking that if they now turn back to Confucius thought and to Taoism, they would be able to understand the metaphysical and transcendent aspects of their traditional culture, which at present it is not there. So, just giving reference to these things, culture in an essential sense, mirrors the whole life of a given society over a larger period of time. It tends to give an all-embracing cultural meaning to things and events. This cultural perception is the manifestation of the foundational frame of reference which a culture provides to its people. Metaphysically speaking, and this is our main point, metaphysically speaking, culture is an inwardness which assumes outward forms. Epistemology and ontology, among other things, are essential ingredients of a culture. This point in the modern conception of culture is almost missing. Because when we talk of culture, we talk of language, we talk of folklore, we talk of music, we talk of art, but we don't talk of epistemology, which is the sources and modes of knowledge. We don't talk of ontology, which gives you the levels of being. So I think this importance, among other things, the understanding of a cultural epistemology and the understanding of a cultural ontology, among other things, is very important to understand that culture. They differentiate a transcendent culture from the ephemeral one. This distinction helps us in understanding the essential characteristics of different cultures. It is the inner reach of a culture which in the last analysis brings out its vitality to integrate divergent trends of different cultures within its bosom. When we talk of cultural integration, so we understand cultural diversity. But when we talk of cultural integration, we have to take the ground realities into consideration. There are certain cultures who do not have the inner reach of having that higher form of integration. So when you are talking of cultural integration, we have to understand that whether a certain culture has its inner reach to have that integration or not. Iqbal has added a very instructive chapter on the spirit of Muslim culture. Islamic culture is a transcendent and traditional culture embracing the permanent and dynamic aspects of life. Its uniqueness consists in its capacity and strength to absorb elements from different cultures. A study of this process of transformation or continuity clearly spells out the vigor of Islam as a universal tradition. It has the ability to creatively assimilate different points of view and different levels of reality. Islamic tradition or Islamic civilization is not windowless. It has appropriated elements of different civilizations and cultures which have been in consonance with its essential doctrine. In short, Islam legitimizes many cultural forms and retains them for the development of an integral being. Iqbal has given an analysis of this, and he quoted one of the Western historians, Horton, who says the Muslim has always adjusted his religious outlook to the elements of culture which he assimilated from the people that surrounded him. But this point has to be kept into consideration. A study of culture from the historical perspective by applying the historical method alone does not take us to the heart of a culture. And this is the weakness of the modern scholarship, that it tries to understand culture from the historical method. It has to be coupled with a methodology which makes us aware of the inner structural reality of a culture. It helps us to understand its spirit. It has to be looked from within and not merely from outside. The cultural studies have to keep an important fact in mind about the Eastern metaphysical concepts which hardly find a parallel in Western philosophical thinking. I'm a student of this topic, that the metaphysical concepts, they hardly find a parallel in the Western philosophical thinking. The metaphysical concept of oneness of being, for example, Wahdat al-Wujud, which is a traditional concept, which is the foundation of both pure and traditional metaphysics, is mistakenly equated with the Western philosophical concept of pantheism. And I must mention here that even Iqbal was influenced by this thinking, and he had opposed the traditional concept of oneness of being because he had in his mind a modern concept of pantheism, which he thought that oneness of being means pantheism. And he was applying the purely modern Western concept to an Eastern concept. And that's why Allama Iqbal is very ambivalent about when it comes to this question of oneness of being. The students of Eastern metaphysics fully understand that the doctrine of oneness of being, unlike pantheism, does not deny the transcendence of God. This is the difference between these 2 points of view. And Iqbal thought that unity of oneness, unity of being is pantheism, and he thought that it denies the transcendence of God. But now when further researches are coming in, so it is now crystal clear that the traditional concept of oneness of being does not deny the transcendence of God. There is no room of pantheism in traditional forms of thinking. Likewise, and this will interest you, the concepts of freedom, equality, and fraternity are qualitatively different in the Eastern and Western cultures. The Quranic concept of justice, adl, is not merely social concept, which we call social justice. It does not merely mean social justice, but it embraces the whole cosmos. The political concept of nationalism is also differently construed in these cultures. The idea of nationalism, Iqbal says, has created variety but has also been exaggerated. And it's very interesting to note that he calls this idea as non-temporal, non-spatial. Whereas in our Western concept, but Iqbal will not call nationalism. He says it has nothing to do with time, non-temporal, non-spatial. We can discuss it when it comes. He does not take the idea of national unity as a very durable force either. He considers the brotherhood of man the only dependable unity which is above race, nationality, color or language. I would like to read 3-4 lines of Iqbal. You will understand. He says, Islam is neither nationalism nor imperialism, but a league of nations which recognizes artificial boundaries and racial distinctions for facility of reference only. For facility of reference only, and not for restricting the social horizon of its members. The traditional, cultural or social institutions are linked to the metaphysic or religious principles. There is a traditional hierarchy of values which cannot be understood merely on the horizontal plane as is being done in the modern world. The Islamic tradition, for example, is both metaphysical and religious. The social institutions of Islam, including the institution of family, are founded on its religious aspect. According to Iqbal, the Quran considers it necessary to unite religion and state, ethics and politics in a single revelation. Now, this point is being missed by the modern understanding because they consider these social institutions as autonomous. And the early Christian distinction between state and church still holds on when Islam is interpreted. And so they say that all these modern social institutions are autonomous. They are not linked with any metaphysical principle or with any religious principle. This is the reason that with full sincerity and intellectual honesty, a modern thinker of the West does not understand the East. Because why he does not understand the East? We will just, I would like to mention 1 or 2 more points. The traditional culture's attachment to an intellectual or religious doctrine gives meaning to all these institutions. They cannot be judged purely from modern standards. They can only be judged from their respective ideal standards in the spirit of wholeness. The role of men and women, for instance. Wherever I've gone to many parts of the world, this question of the place of women in your traditional society, they can never understand. Why? They are very intellectually honest. They want to understand, but they cannot understand because the methodology of understanding the role of women in a traditional society, they are not aware of that methodology. दुनिया के अलावा one of the finest traditional writer. He says, traditional social institutions in principle are effectively attached to a traditional doctrine. It is this attachment which essentially differentiates them from modern social institutions. Unquote. No cultural or social institution in the traditional world is autonomous, as happens in the modern world. We talk of humanism, and again humanism, notwithstanding the spirit of humanism. The very concept of humanism, one of the traditional writers, Shwan Isa Nuruddin, says the most inhuman concept. On the intellectual level, the most inhuman concept which has been given by the West is the concept of humanism. And why? He says, the modern, I will just quote these 2 or 3 lines, but I am just trying to explain this point. The modern humanistic culture is essentially characterized by the absence of the metaphysical principle. It is pertinent to note that whatever form humanism has taken, atheistic, evolutionary, agnostic, scientific, or existential, it has essentially agreed to reduce everything to the purely human elements and thereby to exclude everything which transcends the human plane. This is the philosophy of humanism. It breaks your links from heavens. And one of the traditional writers says, and I would like to quote, traditional civilizations have spoken of man and of course created cultures and disciplines called the humanities of the highest order, but the man they have spoken of has never ceased to be that pontifical man who stands on the axis joining heaven and earth and who bears the imprint of the divine upon his very being. This point has to be constantly kept in view while we are dealing with the subject of cultural diversity and integration. One point I would like to share with you, which will give you an understanding of how we are moving towards cultural integration. The Western civilization has had a great and rich intellectual heritage. The whole world realizes this. But the modern West revolted against its own Christian tradition and the ancient world enswearing its links from heavens. Resultantly, epistemology came to consider sense experience as the only source of knowledge, and ontology followed suit by considering the visible world as the only level of being. The role of reason consisted only in cohering data received from the empirical world. The vertical levels of knowledge and being were displaced by the horizontal ones. The modern man crammed himself in his thought and emotion by becoming oblivious of the sacred and the transcendent, which he had banished both from knowledge and being. Modernism displaced traditional ethics with the modern one. The universal ethics of Jesus was displaced by national ethics. The intellectual and spiritual principles of morality were negated, and morality became autonomous in being tied to human finitude. As a consequence, modernism started becoming irreverent to the metaphysical idea of Eastern religion. It enmeshed itself in the political philosophies of power instead. Nietzsche's philosophy spearheaded the modernist value of brute force, which ultimately led to an unbridgeable gulf between power and vision. Vision was displaced with power devoid of all reverence to the traditional values of truth, justice, freedom, and love. It was in this scenario that the nation states resorted to the First World War and the Second one, the reverberations of which are still audible in the corridors of many nations and communities. The suffering from this political oppression continues in our times in different hidden and open forms. The sense of injustice done to the people in many parts of the world is not mere history, but is a living reality of the oppressed people. Iqbal considered history as an important source of knowledge. He learned many lessons from the philosophy of history. His primary task was to emancipate the Muslim Ummah in particular and human society in general. He acknowledged the pride of the modern age in its progress in knowledge and its scientific advancements, but questions its imperialism, democracy, nationalism, communism, fascism, and related forms. The modernist political forces shaping themselves in his times made him see the modern West drunk with power and unleashing on different feeble nations and communities. He envisions the unity of wisdom and power. Iqbal says, through wisdom alone comes power, and when power abandons the ways of wisdom and relies upon itself alone, its end is death. Unquote. The plight of the Muslims, on the other hand, exhibited powerlessness. He presented a recipe to both East and West in these emphatic words. I quote, Iqbal says, vision without power does bring moral elevation but cannot give a lasting culture. Power without vision tends to become destructive and inhuman. Both must combine for the spiritual expansion of humanity. The modern West, armed with weapons of sheer might, created the problem of Jerusalem. Because unless we understand the problem of Jerusalem, we are not going to understand the Arab plight. This is important, and I have written a few lines on this. It is not possible to fully understand the current Arab Spring without a reference to this issue. Iqbal attempted to awaken the high consciousness on Jerusalem through his prose and poetry in the spirit of righteousness. Iqbal voiced the thoughts and feelings of the Muslim Ummah and the conscience of the world in presenting the case of the Palestinians at that time. He fully opposed the Peel Commission report, which recommended the idea of partitioning Palestine. He still had hopes that sense of justice and fair play will make the British abstain from doing injustice to the people of Palestine. He also wanted the Arab leaders to rise to the occasion, but his hopes did not materialize. He died in 1938, while the British were in control of Palestine under the mandate system of the League of Nations and promoting wider scale immigration of the Jews into Palestine in line with the Balfour Declaration. He did not live to see the partitioning of Palestine in 1948 by a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly and the establishment of Jewish State of Israel. And this is important. It was not only what was done by the Western powers, but the way it was done drew a big question mark on the integrity of modern world institutions and their capacity to provide justice. And this question mark still remains. The traditional world, comprising the great metaphysical and religious traditions of the world, has been a mirror of cultural harmony in Jerusalem, which from the times of Caliph Umar has been mainly a sanctuary for the Muslims, Jews and Christians. But the disruptive forces of colonialism, in flagrant violation of the traditional principle of justice, sowed the seeds of disunity and a consequence rooted the centuries-tested principle of cultural diversity and integration. The religious divide among the Jews, Christians and Muslims has been traditionally and a family affair in Palestine for a greater period part of several centuries. It is modernism which initiated a political divide amongst them in violence of the traditional spirit. The dissolution of the, and this point is very important, the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, the breaking of the Arabian world in fragments, and the tearing apart of the Muslim fabric of being at the hands of the Western might had created great problems for the Arab world. The forces of imperialism, which earlier not only subjugated the Arabs, but in the same vein imposed such rulers on them or supported them till their end was in sight, continued an era of suppressing the people. The transformation in the Arab world is essentially an awakening against the oppressors who have exploited their people in the name of religion, or modernism, and whose roots go back to the imperialist designs. The dark night of the Arab world is having its dawn, and people are finding happiness in their new found freedom. The desperate attempt of the modern West to impose modernism on humanity in different forms is widening the gulf between people living in different parts of the world. There can never be a clash of civilizations. I am so happy some of the points of views by our distinguished speakers who are raised in the morning about clash of civilizations. I have just a humble point of view to add. There can never be a clash of civilizations, even if one of the civilizations ceases to be a civilization by turning into a sensate culture. Civilizations, by their very definition, are vertically tied with heavens, and they have inherent strength to absorb even the greatest horizontal shocks. They are attuned to dispel evil with good. But the agenda of demolishing the traditional world can lead to cultural contradictions without any possibility of integration. There is no denying the fact that certain oppressive things due to fallible human elements have crept up in the traditional society in the forms of cruel customs, naive beliefs, and outworn practices. But they are not only against the sensitivity of the contemporary man, but they contradict the tradition itself. However, the very idea of reforming such a society on modern standards is highly counterproductive. This point I want to share with you. The very idea of reforming such a society, that is the traditional, on modern standards is highly counterproductive. A traditional society can only be creatively transformed from within in consonance with its own permanent ideals inherent in its respective tradition. The best way for the modern world is to sincerely refrain from modernizing the traditional world and let it flower from within. Rather, the modern West needs to rediscover its own Christian tradition and thereby initiate a genuine dialogue with the traditional societies. A pure traditional society is no threat either to the modern West or to humanity. I have been a student of this subject. A pure traditional society is no threat either to the modern West or to humanity. Rather, it is a guarantor of universal peace and harmony. The principle of spirituality is the foundation of humanity. The role of spirituality is crucial in cementing the bonds of mankind. Iqbal says, and I quote, "Humanity needs three things today: a spiritual interpretation of the universe, spiritual emancipation of the individual, and basic principles of a universal import directing the evolution of human society on a spiritual basis." This is a challenge of spirituality, which even the traditional societies have started facing in the face of the modern times. There are certain segments of Muslim community which are becoming more and more ritualistic, moralistic, rationalistic, and militant. The aforesaid trends are generally manifest in all those schools of thought which are directly or indirectly aversive to Sufi doctrines, methods, and practices. If you read all this militancy, you will find that all these people, all these schools of thought are aversive to Sufism, which is the spiritual dimension of Islam. Mere clinging to the exoteric aspects of religion at the cost of its esoteric or spiritual dimension leads to conflicts within a religious perspective and also contradictions among other religious perspectives. Such religious behavior is inconsistent with the idea of the transcendent unity of religions and the metaphysical principle of unity in diversity. It is the need of the hour that the younger generation of the Arab world are awakened to their common intellectual and spiritual heritage. It is the spiritual element of a traditional society which can prove to be a unifying force. It will foster unity in a tradition and help foster unity amongst other traditions of the world. One cannot reach unity by adding multiplicity. Spirituality is essential for the survival and development of both the individual and society. And this, again, Iqbal has given us his concept of state. We can discuss it. He says that Tawheed is not following the thrones, worshipping the thrones. It is finding the law which gives you sense of equality and justice. Iqbal deems the integration of the principles of permanence change necessary for the development of cultural consciousness. This is my second last point. The problem is intellectually, metaphysically, politically, the principles of permanence and change have not been understood. The traditional world stands for permanence and the modern world stands for change. Iqbal says it's not like that. And what he says, we just discussed. Iqbal deems the integration of the principles of permanence and change necessary for the development of cultural consciousness. He is a philosopher of transforming man's inner and outer world. He brings this fact in these emphatic words, and I would like to quote his words. The ultimate spiritual basis of all life, as conceived by Islam, is eternal and reveals itself in variety and change. A society based on such a conception of reality must reconcile in its life the categories of permanence and change. It must possess eternal principles to regulate its collective life, and this line is very important. For the eternal gives us a foothold in the world of perpetual change. But eternal principles, when they are understood to exclude all possibilities of change, which according to the Quran is one of the greatest signs of God, tend to immobilize what is essentially mobile in its nature, unquote. The crisis of the European world in political and social sciences is due to its ascribing solely to the reality of change, at the cost of negating the principle of permanence. And the immobility of Islam for the past several centuries is due to ascribing only to the principle of permanence at the cost of negating the reality of change. Iqbal considers Islamic law as essentially dynamic and not stationary. He advocates ijtihad in order for the Muslims to integrate the categories of permanence and change in their lives and thereby solve their problems in consonance with the divine will. The Arab Spring, how much can I put? Right? In these 5 minutes, I would just like to end with one or two quotations of Iqbal, which he gave caution to the people of Turkey when the caliphate movement was, when the caliphate was abolished and the youngsters came up to have some reforms with liberal ideas. And Iqbal, who wanted that this movement of the Turks should remain within the principles, gave them certain guidance. In the end, it is significant to mention Iqbal's guidance to the Turks who were emancipating themselves from the oppressive structures of their society. His views are relevant to the Arab Spring as well. In his lecture on the principle of movement in the structure of Islam, he, among other things, mentions the plight of most Muslim countries of his times in these words. They are mechanically repeating old values, whereas the Turk is on the way to creating new values. He has passed through great experiences which have revealed his deeper self to him. In him, life has begun to move, change, and amplify, giving birth to new desires, bringing new difficulties, and suggesting new interpretations. Unquote. However, he cautions the Turks, and his caution is equally applicable to the younger generation of the Arab world. And with this, we will end this way. His quotation is, "We heartily welcome the liberal movement in modern Islam, but it must also be admitted that the appearance of liberal ideas in Islam constitutes also the most critical moment in the history of Islam. Liberalism has a tendency to act as a force of disintegration, and the race idea, which appears to be working in modern Islam with greater force than ever, may ultimately wipe off the broad human outlook which Muslim people have imbibed from their religion. Further, our religious and political reformers in their zeal for liberalism may overstep their proper limits of reform in the absence of check on their youthful fervor." So, the point is simple, that this Arab uprising, Arab awakening, Arab spring, Arab transformation has to be studied deeply, and the modern West and the traditional societies have to learn from their past experiences so that they do not commit past mistake or any fresh mistake. Thank you.
Thank you very much.